Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, this is Rahul, your Filmi Baniya, and today is a momentous occasion for our amazing podcast, as today we are being joined by a legendary figure in popular culture, in comic books, in books, in such and publishing, and a celebrity of sorts. Today is our exclusive, India exclusive interview with the legendary Dirk Maggs, the director of Audible's The Sandman, written by and illustrated by Neil Gaiman and various artists. And just to give you a little bit of background, by the way, hello Dirk, how are you doing?
Hello Rahul, I'm fine. It's lovely to be on the show. Thank you very much for having me.
Great. Dirk Maggs, just to give a heads up to our audience, Dirk Maggs is what can be possibly called a unique individual who has spent close to 5 decades in producing audio content. In an age where 4G internet and video is ruling the roost, if there is one torchbearer for audio when it comes to popular culture, popular fiction, and various creative works, Dirk Maggs takes the cake and the cherry. We would definitely like to hear more about his adventures and what he has done in his life. The subject today, of course, is the unique audiobook, The Sandman, based on Neil Gaiman's multi-award winning comic book series since 1989, published by DC. This event is bought in association with Audible and DC with support from Comic-Con India. So Dirk, let's start the show with the questions, with your permission.
Of course, please fire away.
Yeah. So Dirk, how did the idea of adapting Sandman to an audiobook came in the age of video, 4G internet, after 31 years?
Well, it's I've got now to cut down this story into manageable amounts so that we're not actually here for 31 years while I tell you it. I've just had a conversation with Neil about this because I wanted to check a couple of things before I spoke to you, and he was saying that, you know, we've been at this for nearly 3 decades, and it's absolutely true. And I will try and briefly encapsulate my career. I joined the BBC as a studio engineer in the late 1970s, and because I wanted to get into production. I actually wanted to work in TV because that's where my interests were, television and film. But I fell in love with audio as a storytelling medium, and so I eventually got a job in the comedy department, BBC Radio Light Entertainment, who also were not only making comedy programs, but also sort of light drama, if I can call it that, you know, sort of not serious Shakespeare-y stuff, but more kind of straight drama-y, but not too heavy. And I did a production of Superman for them, and I did a production with Batman for them. And in doing so, I I became acquainted with DC Comics in New York, who are the publishers of Superman and Batman, and made friends there. And then as my career went on, as well as doing the comedy stuff, I was doing this sort of superhero stuff. And I developed a production style which is very much more like a film soundtrack than a radio play. You know, a radio play in BBC tradition is sort of more tea vicar, cups of tea, doors opening, the gentle tolling of a church bell in the country churchyard. You know, that sort of cliche, which is terribly unfair, but kind of sums up what I was fighting against. And I wanted to have widescreen, you know, sort of James Cameron, huge spectacle. So I had big, you know, layers of sound effects, big music, big library music, and I would use the best cast I could get. And it went very well. And in this, you know, in the process, I made friends at DC Comics in New York, and a particular lady called Phyllis Hume, who is sadly no longer with us. But Phyllis said to me one day when we were chatting, have you heard of a guy, have you met a guy called Neil Gaiman? And I said, well, look, you know, the UK is a small island, but it's not that small. No, I haven't. And she said, oh, you should, he's pretty, you know, you should read his stuff. Anyway, she sent me the first collected volume of Sandman. And as soon as I read it, I just thought, wow, this stuff is amazing. This man has invented a whole new mythology. He is completely, I mean, he's either completely insane or a genius. I'm not quite sure which. And in the process of the next couple of years, when people asked me for more program ideas, I was I was thinking what I could offer. And one of the things I said was, look, you've taken Superman and Batman, which after all are American creations, and they're wonderful, but you know, they are of a certain ilk. But here we have a British writer who's writing this amazing mixture of mythologies, and he's invented a new mythology on top of it all. Can't we do this? And I approached Neil by email beforehand saying, look, do you mind? He said, no, not at all, being a thoroughly nice guy that he is. And the BBC passed on it, and they passed on it about 6 times over the last 30, roughly every 5 years. I'd re-offer Sandman, thinking surely this time they will realize how good this is and what a brilliant writer it is. And this isn't to criticize the BBC, but their commissioning editors weren't aware of Neil's worth, I think, for a long time. And that was really the problem. So it languished, it never happened. And I did many other productions. And in the meantime, the author Douglas Adams had heard my Superman series and asked if I would be interested in taking on The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So I went off in another direction.
I was about to, when you said Douglas Adams, I thought it's The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Yeah, please carry on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, Douglas, you know, all the time I'm trying to sell Neil, Douglas hears my work and says, do you know what, I think this is the chap to carry on with Hitchhikers, because there had been 2 radio series, then a TV series, and then 5 novels, 3 of which had never happened on the radio. And Douglas rather liked the idea of bringing them back home to audio. And I was so flattered to be asked. I think I was around at his front door in London before he put the phone down, frankly. And so we, you know, that sort of took my life over. It took a little longer than I expected to make the Hitchhikers shows. And sadly and horribly, Douglas died before we could do it. But he was very much a part of the process as far as I was concerned. There was always a sort of virtual Douglas on my shoulder. But one of the funny things about Douglas was that he was, in a way, a mentor to me, but he was also a mentor to Neil, because Neil, as a young journalist, went to interview Douglas for a piece for a magazine and ended up writing a sort of history of Douglas and Hitchhikers up to that point called Don't Panic, which is still one of the best. If you want a sort of really amusing history of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and Douglas Adams, Neil's book Don't Panic is an absolute must. And I do believe actually Simon Jones has just recorded it, Simon, who played the lead in the TV and the radio series. So yeah, it was strange because Neil and I had this sort of friendship. We hadn't met physically, but we'd emailed each other. We knew Douglas mutually, and I could not for the life of me get this off the ground. And it all went rather quiet until the early part of this decade, when I was taking Hitchhikers out as a stage show in the UK with the original radio cast. And we sort of did it live on stage with a band and sound effects and the cast. And we had a Marvin made out of bits of old radio studios, a Marvin robot who was made out of old radios and tape recorders and what have you. And for the final show of the run, knowing, you know, that Neil was actually going to be in the UK at the time, I said, do you fancy being our voice of the book for this final show in Edinburgh? And he said, I'd love to. And so finally we met backstage at the Empire. Was it the Empire Theatre, Edinburgh? Yeah. So anyway, it was the theatre in Edinburgh. And it was lovely because it was like meeting a pen pal, I suppose, someone you never actually met, but you knew you got on with terribly well. And he did an excellent he did an excellent job as the voice of the book. And it was a joy to meet him. And the funny thing was that at the same time as we booked this thing, I got an email from a BBC producer called Heather Lama, who was making dramas for BBC Radio. And Heather said, I'm doing Neil Gaiman's Neverwhere for the BBC. Would you, and Neil has asked, would you adapt it and co-direct it? And Heather and I co-directed Neverwhere, Good Omens, Stardust, How the Marquis Got His Coat Back, which is a sequel to Neverwhere. These are all Neil stories. And I adapted Anansi Boys later on. Yes. Yeah, and so I started having this sort of audio career with Neil Neil, because Neil was definitely part of this sort of triumvirate of Heather, me, and Neil. Um, and Sandman was not spoken of once because we were doing all these other things. But the success of them was such. BBC Radio couldn't quite believe, after all these years, I've got to admit, I had a little bit of schadenfreude, you know, a little bit of, how should we say, I felt vindicated because here, when we did Neverwhere, suddenly, did we not only have a production that got them millions of web hits within days, and I've been telling them for 30 years how brilliant Neil was, but also when I walked in for the read-through, round the table, it was a pinch me, I'm dreaming moment, because round the table there's James McAvoy, Natalie Dormer, Benedict Cumberbatch, Sophie Okonedo, Bernard Cribbins, and Christopher flipping Lee, of all people. So there was this moment of thinking, hang on a minute, how can they not take Neverwhere when this attracts talent like this? But anyway, the ironical or strange story is that eventually the people who unlocked the door of this happening were DC Comics, who normally would be the people I'd go to cap in hand, begging very, very humbly, is it possible we could make this? But actually, a great guy called Sandy Resnick, who's been at DC, he was kind of like making the tea in the office when I first used to speak to Phyllis 30 years ago. And now he's vice president in charge of,
just to intervene, Sandy and I met in 2011 in his office in Manhattan, and with the idea of bringing some DC Comics to India, although that never materialized because then he shifted to Los Angeles from New York. And Sandy is the first person who shared the audio news about Sandman, and he's known to me, not very well, but socially we have met. Yes, he's a nice guy, amazing guy.
I will remind him of you, Rahul, because I will be talking to him later today. So that's great. Well, Sandy is a very good guy, as you say. And he got in touch and said, I see you're working with Neil, and I see that we still own Sandman. So Neil, it's not in Neil's gift to allow it to happen. How would do you think Neil would go for it? Do you think Neil would like it to happen if we were to make the rights available? Would you work with Neil to do it? And I said, well, of course, I don't know, Neil and I, we very seldom talk to each other. Of course, no, I didn't say that. I'm joking. I said, well, I'll ask him. So I sent Neil a quick email saying, DC are talking about Sandman as an audio. Would you be interested? And he just came back with a 2-word reply, one of which I can't say. And the other one was, yeah.
That's a good one. So that's it.
Dirk, and we were underway.
Dirk, one of the most amazing things about Sandman, the way it's been promoted across the world, is that it sounds and looks like a magnum opus to even people who have never read the comic book. So, in this world of lockdowns, when consumption of media is changing rapidly, forms of consumption is changing, there is this audiobook, produced by Audible, Amazon company, big company. You have DC, which is backed by Warner Brothers, another big company. And they come out with this cast of Riz Ahmed, Kate Dennings, James McAvoy, Taron Egerton from Kingsman, just to my audience, giving a little bit of an idea. And, this doesn't look like just an audiobook. It looks more like a watershed moment in which you are actually producing an epic. Would you agree?
It's the strangest thing, because I would have said to you 15 years ago that our industry was dying, because there was, certainly in the UK, there was only the BBC doing audio drama. Let's say 20 years ago. Let me make this a comfortable distance. But there was a point during my working career where I thought I'd better seriously start finding other things to do. I better do more writing. I better do less audio. Much as I loved audio and wanted to make it work, I just couldn't see a way of making it pay after a few years because things were running out. And then the internet happened and smartphones happened. And there was a revolution in the way people entertained themselves. And I remember in the early 90s when I was making the Supermans and Batmans, I was determined to try and make them a visual experience for the imagination, but feeding in through the side door, through the ear, rather than through the front door of the eye. because I knew that audio could do that. And we developed this sort of cinematic storytelling style. And I used to go to work in London on the tube, on the underground train. And I'd see all these people plugged into what were then the Sony Walkmans with the little cassettes, you know.
That's like ancient Sony Walkman.
I know. It's Stone Age culture. Yes, yes. Queen Elizabeth I and her Sony Walkman. Yeah. And anyway, so and I was thinking, well, you know, they're listening to music, evidently, but they could be listening to stories. They could be lost in other worlds. And so that was kind of always with me, but nothing, you know, towards the end of the 90s, you know, the internet had happened, but wasn't what it is now. And there was a company called Audible doing audiobooks, but they were low quality, lo-fi. You know, I was doing stuff, we'd done stuff in Dolby Surround. So I wasn't interested in working in telephone quality audio. There were all of these things. And I just thought, I think we are going to run out of impetus and steam here. But then the internet came along and smartphones came along. And suddenly audio had this amazing resurgence, and it was just fascinating. Digital technology was the first revolution in audio, but I'd argue the second revolution in audio was the smartphone, where you can literally carry a world around in your pocket. And CDs are great too, and all of that, but this was, you know, you could carry hours of entertainment in a small device. So the iPod, of course, had that, and the Zune for the Microsoft users and all of that, but even so, I think the smartphones was the defining moment when the mass market moved into the mass ear hole, if you'll pardon the expression. And yeah. I think that's where we suddenly had a turnaround. And about sort of, what were we saying? About 10 years ago, suddenly the ball started rolling. But the thing is, suddenly it started rolling not just in the UK or in India, but also it started rolling in the United States. And we know that market forces in the United States kind of are the governing factor as to what happens in the rest of the world. And what was interesting was not only people started listening to stuff, because radio in the US had long abandoned scripted stuff, long abandoned storytelling in favor of music and shock jockeys and all of this stuff. But suddenly they started getting story oriented again. And it wasn't so much the radio as the general public. And there are now many, many groups of people just making audio stories in America who would 20 years ago not even have known of the medium. And I think that the ripples of that have spread worldwide. And the beauty of where I am is the UK kind of, because of the BBC, never kind of stopped doing that. So there was this kind of specialized knowledge here, which is where suddenly I found myself in work when I'd absolutely with certainty expected myself to be unemployed, which is rather nice, particularly when it comes to finishing a job we started 28 years ago.
Superb. Okay, so now I'm just getting some questions from fans, and the question is, the first 3 editions have been covered in the audiobook of Sandman. Will the rest of the editions will be adapted as well?
The official answer I can give is we hope so.
That's a very political answer, if I might, add.
I've been told that any announcement needs to be made officially and with great fanfares, and I haven't got my trumpets with me.
No, fair enough. So one of the questions which has come out by many readers is, how did you go about doing the casting for the audiobook? How did you say that this character will play Morpheus, this will play Death, Delirium? I mean, how would you cast? Because these are all in books, and for an audiobook, might as well something is in the, one might think that, okay, that person would be very good for the visual medium. But how do you decide, will somebody be good for the audio medium?
Well, first of all, we want actors who don't eat too much cake, because I like there to be cake left for me at the end of the session. That's the first rule, So James McAvoy doesn't eat a lot of cake, so I know I'll get cake. It's very to go with my cup of tea, you see. I have to be very strict about this. And I know that James is not a big cake eater. But I will now answer you seriously, Rahul. Look, the thing about a good audio actor is that they're actually a good actor. That's really the thing. People think there are audio actors and there are TV actors, theatre actors, film actors. There are stars associated with each of those media, but a good actor is where you start from any of those points of view. And generally speaking, if you meet someone who's a huge star in Bollywood or in audio or in TV, generally speaking, they're intelligent, they're versatile, they're thoughtful, they prepare for the job, they come in ready to work, and so on. So that would be the definition of a successful working actor, whether they were a star or not. That said, it's always good to have names which attract interest. And it's an interesting thing, because when we did Neverwhere, James McAvoy, I first worked with James on Neverwhere. And James is lovely, and I get on with him really well. He's a really bright guy. He's a ball of energy. And I said to James, we took a coffee break during the table read of the scripts for Neverwhere. And I said to him, I'm not being rude, but why are you doing this when you could be earning telephone numbers in Hollywood, And he
I like that word. I like the word telephone numbers.
Yeah. And he said, and I'm adjusting the language slightly here because he is Glaswegian. He said, because I flippin' love it. And that was the thing. He loves Neil. He loves fantasy. And as you would know from his body of work, he's kind of a geek in a very cool and, hip way. James is a geek. And that's the thing, really. What we needed was a cast who understood what we were trying to do, who loved Neil's work, who could act their socks off, and who'd sound right for the roles. And we needed some actors like James, like Kat, like Taron, like so many of the others, Miriam, it's an all A list from start to finish, our cast. You need people who are going to lift the material off the page and create something magical. And that's where we start. The big difference between doing this job, let's say, and A Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was I had a living author I could talk to, whereas I had to summon up my memories of conversations with the late Douglas to do Hitchhikers. On this one, I've got Neil at the end of the email or even the phone if I'm in a hurry, and he will immediately come back with information. So we were talking through who should we have, and he was saying, I feel the Endless should be this kind of actor, and so on and so forth. And then it comes down to who's available. But very early on, we thought James was a strong contender for Morpheus because, as I said earlier, he's a ball of energy. Morpheus can be seen as a passive character, but he's always a presence in the room. He's like a glowing, fizzing thing in the corner. Even if he's doing nothing, he's got this energy. And James brings that to any performance, as well as a brilliant vocally. He does this in pretty much an English accent. He could do it Scottish, he could do it American, but he does it in an English accent, which is, great. So it was that kind of thing. And then we were looking for a death. And I said to Neil, what thoughts have you got? And he said, well, and we looked at lots of actresses for death. We looked at Asian actresses. We looked at African actresses. We looked at European. We looked at, I think the only group we didn't cover was Inuit. And if we'd known of a great Inuit actress, we'd have included her as well. It didn't matter what the ethnicity was. In the end, it was someone who could embody that type. And Neil said, a person I really think could do it is Kat Dennings. And I didn't know Kat's work, so I had to go and look up her stuff online. And she was in a very successful American sitcom called Two Broke Girls. And she's been in the Thor movies, the Marvel movies. So, and I heard the voice. I thought, yeah, because this embodies that fizzy, that perky sort of death-like quality. This isn't someone whose voice says you should take them seriously. And yet they do the most serious job of all the Endless. They finish lives in a totally non-judgmental, non-sinister way. And this kind of thing. So that was sort of behind it. And then we had a brilliant casting team led by Marielle Reneka Temple at Audible in London. They were coming up with ideas. Taron Egerton for Constantine. And I said, he wants to do it. He'd love to do it. Right. Yes. Because I know Taron can act his socks off. And then I would suggest, for example, Josie Lawrence to play a Mad Hetty, because Josie's a great character actress in London and so on. And And actually, from India, we had a brilliant actor called Saga Arya who plays one of the serial killers
Oh,
in
wow.
episode 4
Fantastic.
Galactus. And Saga plays the connoisseur. And when you hear Saga's voice, it's like liquid gold. I love Saga's voice. He's just got he's got a beautiful Indian accent and this lovely voice. He sounds like a lovely, peaceful day somewhere under a palm tree with a tall drink.
Well, I think something which really stands out of your work and Neil's work is that this entire universe of Sandman, American Gods, it's a very globally inclusive world. It's not confined to one kind of nationality. Like, for example, in American Gods, you have an Indian goddess called Mamaji, which is there. You know, she's played by Sakina Jaffrey, another famous Indian-American actor in the TV show on Amazon. And you see these references of a global, inclusive, community of people, which we are talking about. And that's something which is very rare, because I was speaking to Michael Uslan in my last episode, who is the executive producer of all Batman films and the Dark Knight films. And he said, Rahul, you know, the big problem we faced when we were casting for Batman in 1989 is that people would just not open their mind to either black or white. That's it. That's the end of the casting. And I think what your work and Neil's work is that it's opening doors for new actors from across the world. And that's like a global event.
And that's how it should be, because we're living in on a shrinking planet. Absolutely. I mean, Neil is the champion of this. Neil, because in Sandman, which is now 30 plus years old, you have it's about humans and immortals. It's not about what color is your skin, what is your religion, what is this, what is that. It just envelops all of that. And interestingly, we talked about this a lot because it's not just ethnicity, it's also Neil's, the work we've already covered in this one. Desire is a non-binary character. It's not a he, it's not a she, it's a they.
Yep, absolutely.
Now this is written 32 years ago. Neil is already dealing then with issues now that have become hot potatoes. And later on we're going to go into transsexual characters and what have you. We're going to go into all of this is coming up. And the thing is, Neil is trying to rise up above judgment, and I believe trying to rise up above the petty differences which really shouldn't be dividing us, and gets us into a global consciousness. And this is how the production has to be from my point of view as well. And I know from the point of view of the folks at Audible, there's a little bit of missionary zeal, not in a religious sense, but just in a sort of globalist, humanist sense here. Not to deny anyone their religion or any of their cultural stuff they want to keep, because that was what makes us different, is what's great. But what Neil does is take what makes people very, very different and then show that they're just humans under all of that. So yeah, I think you raise a really important point, Rahul, and I'm really glad you've raised it. And I'm also glad you've raised American Gods, because I was talking to Neil earlier today, and I was saying, I know there's a story based on sort of Vikram and the vampire and all of that.
Yes, Vikram Betal.
Yeah, and it's actually Hobbes' Leviathan, which, should we make a third series? Should we make a third series? And I'm not saying we will, but if we were to get to a third series, Rahul, if you know what I mean, I expect we'll probably make that one, if you know what I mean. Okay.
Yes, of course.
I think that's got that one through. And the thing in Hobbes' Leviathan, which in itself is a pun about an English philosopher, Thomas Hobbes, who wrote a book called Leviathan, but Hob Gadling, who's the character we introduced in episode 10, as we have it, of our audio production, is talking about it's about the immortality thing, the old man and immortality should be given to the young, and all of this. It's the old. I'm trying to find the actual name of the legend, but it's Vikram and the Vampire. I can't find but you will know this.
Well, if you're
No.
talking about this is called Vikram Betal. That's what it's called in Hindi. Vikram
I beg your
Betal.
pardon. Please
Yeah.
excuse my ignorance, but it's fascinating to me, and I need to read up on my Hindi, stuff.
Well,
I'm
well,
lamentably ill-informed.
I have some questions regarding this. Have you read any Indian literature, and are there any favorites of Dirk Maggs in Indian literature?
To my shame, I don't know it well enough, and I am redressing that balance. I really, really am. As a child, as a child in the 60s, one would read the Jungle Book and what have you. And that obviously is the colonialist view of India. And I know that the culture is so much more interesting than that. My wife and I have a sort of bucket list thing to actually come visit and soak
Most
ourselves in it.
welcome.
So we have to do this because it's really important. We're all related after all, and it's really pretty vital these days because I think cultures have been, how should we say, overshadowed by the legacy of colonial days. And actually, when you look at some of the stuff, some of your legends and myths and some of the figures, it's just epic. I mean, it's Gilgamesh. All this stuff is just amazing.
Yes, Gilgamesh. Yes.
Yes.
Well,
So next time we talk, I will be much better informed. I swear it.
I think one of our partners for this event's marketing is Comic Con India, and India Comic Con is was owned by Reed Exhibitions, Reed Pop. And what we can do is when this COVID situation subsides, we can try to come and get you at the Comic Con in India. That's even more exciting. Yeah. And because because I think the work of the Sandman has a lot of resonance to the whole species of humans. Like one of our next question is that how is Sandman relevant to the current socio-political construct of our environments?
That's a very good question, and I now have to try and frame an answer in terms that sound vaguely intelligent. I would say that rather, as I was saying just now, I think Neil actually anticipated an awful lot of socio-political issues that are now applying today. Actually, kind of apply earlier on. He's talking about some of the stuff that social media are obsessed with, like ethnicity, like gender identification, and so on. He's also, it's very interesting, there are no smartphones in the Sandman. There's no internet. These people live in a world of analog communication. And yet somehow I feel that this is where I'm going to probably sound a bit pretentious, but I'm going for it, Rahul, so bear with me. I think there's an element of the dream, the world of dream, the realm of the Lord of Dreams being this shared consciousness, which is kind of slightly emblematic of what we now know as the World Wide Web, as the internet, where we share our dreams and our aspirations and our prejudices, sadly, with each other, because just like the world of dreams, the internet is equally capable of sublime and wonderful thought, as well as the basest and worst of humanity. You can experience that in dreams just as you can on the internet. And I think I'm on a voyage of rediscovery with the Sandman as we've been making these, because it's obviously a while since I read them for pleasure. Now I'm working with them for for work. But all the way I'm going through it and I'm thinking, I actually emailed Neil while we were doing the first lot, and I said, did you know when you wrote this how good you are? How clever this is. I mean, I'm taking these lines out from your scripts and from the characters, and I'm writing them down, and these are just going to play really well with the cast, And I sent this to him, and he came back and said, I honestly don't remember being that person. I'm not that person anymore, which was fascinating, because you realize that, of course, 30 years changes somebody a lot. And so he kind of, it's quite fun, I think, for Neil, because he comes back at this and rediscovers his old self. But Neil was a library, he says this himself, he was a library brat. He spent his childhood not in the pool halls or the gambling dens, but in libraries, reading books, voraciously soaking all this stuff up. And it seems to me that the Sandman is where all the stuff he's soaked up comes gushing out. All these connections from mythology, through religion, through philosophy, through fairy tales, through all these mythical realms. It actually all comes into this massive tapestry, which is full of unprecedented things. He uses old gods like the Norse gods and old folk stories like Vikram and the Vampire, if you'll pardon me using the English title. And then at the same time, he's taking the Greek mythology. He's got Calliope, he's got the Furies, he's got all these elements. And on top of that, he's superimposing his own mythology, which is the endless, which are from his own imagination. And it's a voyage where you really don't know what's going to happen next. That's the trouble. People say to you, when we were working on it, marketing was saying, right now, how do we sell this? What do we tell people it's about? And I'm thinking, wow, where do we start? Where do you start with something this huge? And in the end, you can just say, well, it's about the Lord of the Dreams. And, we came up with a form of words. But the only way to really experience Sandman is to experience it.
Fantastic. And our other question is again coming up. We have a question. In your long-standing partnership with Neil Gaiman, please tell us that one factor that has kept you together for more than 28 years. I think that's precise, 1992. We read that, or is that before?
Well, it's about 1989, 1990, but 92 is where we started, actually talking about Sandman.
Yeah. So about 30 years plus partnership. And please share an incident to illustrate the beauty of your relationship with Neil.
Well, if I was being facile, I would say our relationship was hero worship on my part and pity on Neil's. I think we have a strong mutual regard for each other because we share, there's a cultural thing, if you meet another person from your neighborhood somewhere completely foreign to both of you, you kind of bond over things like the sweets you enjoyed as a kid or the corner shop you went to or whatever. It's kind of a cultural thing. And I think, he's very much a world traveler these days and lives in the States, but I can kind of get him on obscure pop culture references and so on. It's kind of a schoolboy, kind of schoolmates, I would say we were actually. It's like we meet in the playground to swap, playing cards or whatever. Yeah, it's like school friends, I would say. That's the nicest part of it. And I think the thing that really, defines, if I was trying to think of an incident, and there are quite a lot of incidents that, that sort of have happened over the years. But I think it's moments where I've been in a studio with Neil and Heather, or just with Neil, and if Heather's in there or something, and we both have a creative idea at the same time, where you both light on the same thing and you realize that you really are totally attuned to each other's wavelengths. And I think that's the thing, because I'm actually, Neil is, he's a very cool guy, and he's all of these things, and I'm really a failed rock drummer. I'm actually I've played drums in more bands than I've shaken a stick at back in the day. Quite a lot. And I must say, drumming has occasionally paid the grocery bills when things have been hard. But it's the first time we met. Neil was being the voice of the book in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and I was playing drums in the band on stage. Even though I was directing it, I wasn't going to miss out on the fun. So kind of we were in our respective niches for that gig, where he was being this authoritative voice of the book and reading beautifully, and I was there slamming hell out of a drum kit. So we come from kind of slightly different corners, but in the end we bond in the school playground. We're doing different subjects, but we meet in the playground and we have fun.
what a beautiful way to illustrate this relationship, and how descriptive you are and creative as you are. You've just given the reference of school playground. And I think we can think of some amazing parallels, like the Jean Harlan Stanley Kubrick partnership, which went on for many of Kubrick's films. The understanding of the content and the description of the content as you might on a medium. And I mean, this is something like a very honest relationship. And I think it will last for far longer than any of us can imagine. My best wishes on that.
I hope so. Yes, I've tried his patience sorely a few times, but we're still talking to each other, so it must be good.
Okay. Our next question is by a friend of mine called Carlton. He's a diehard DC Comics fan, and he says, "Is there a possibility of a crossover of the Sandman and Justice League Dark?"
I think that the nearest thing we've had would be in the episode we've already done, Passengers, which was episode 5, where we meet Scott Free, who's Mr. Miracle,
Right.
and we hear about his background on Apocalypse under Darkseid. We are, the thing about this adaptation, and I think this is a good place to point it out, because I mentioned earlier on about the internet and about how the modern thing, you don't see the internet and you don't see cell phones in Sandman because it was written in the late 80s, early 90s. And it's a deliberate decision by me not to modernize it at all, because originally I thought that I could bring it slightly up to date. But now there is, I don't want to talk about it because it's not my thing, but there is a TV series of Sandman in the works. From Netflix.
We have a question coming up on that as well.
Okay, but well, I mean, okay, maybe I can answer that then. But I feel that what my immediate thought was, this is where we don't try and be clever. This is where we take Sandman as written and we make it as written. But there was a little extra little wheel on that, which I'll come to when you ask me the TV series question, because there's something we're doing that the TV series can't do that I'm rather thrilled about. But so going back to your friend's question, I don't want to reinvent the wheel. If it ain't broke, I don't want to fix it. If Sandman intersects with the DC universe, great, if that's what Neil wrote. So for example, in Passengers, it does briefly, we meet Scott Free, we meet John Johns, the Martian Manhunter briefly, played brilliantly by Reginald D. Hunter. But in fact, we stay in our own world and the crossovers are few and far between. I mean, I think my favorite line in that episode is where Scott Free says, "Oh, we could ask Batman." "Oh no, it's nighttime. He'll be working." I love that line. He'll be working. He's beating up bad guys.
Well, if I might add that, just for a little break from these questions, just to tell you about the kind of fan universe we have in India. Now, as I was going for this interview, I was looking at some fan theories and questions for you. So I got to know there are these 2 virtual Facebook communities called the DC Community of Bengal, which is the state of West Bengal, has close to 2,000 active users every day. And these are essentially computer programmers talking about their love for comics on Facebook. Then there is a DC club in Kerala, the southern state of Kerala. And there is no DC club in New Delhi, in Mumbai, in the big towns. So we see this revolution of content love coming from all nooks and corners of India. And this is the beauty of interviews like this, is that we bring these unique questions from all over, from the smallest parts of our country.
I love that. And I love that also they're questions that fans all over the world ask, which shows again how globalized we all really are. You know, we everybody's asking these. Everybody, is curious about the same thing. So that makes me very happy.
Great. Okay, so there's a question about any possibilities of the Book of Magic to be made into a live-action series, which is the true precursor to Harry Potter films, according to our readers.
Yeah, I mean that's not my that's not my thing. Live action series involves if that's visual, that's not me. I do all my visuals in your mind. So I can't. I honestly can't answer that.
Okay, no problem. So now some information on the Netflix Sandman project, which has been going on for quite some time. In fact, Neil had just given an interview to Collider in the United States, to Collider Interviews, and he said that it's in the works, but we would like to hear from you. What is it? Have you done any casting? What's the show's format going to be like? Anything? And would you be involved more than anything else?
You know what? I've got so much on my plate with the audio Sandman that I probably haven't got the time. Secondly, in television, the thing about, I really want the Netflix series to succeed, and I want it, and I know it will because Neil is going to be involved. I also know that because Neil is involved, and because we are doing the audio version so faithfully to the original stories, which everybody loves, that this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity for Neil and David Goyer and the show running team to move Sandman slightly on. So, for example, they are moving it into the present day. The story, Dream is finally freed in the present day, and so a lot of references are going to change, and I believe the gender of some characters is going to change. Various things are going to be moved on slightly, even if the story still starts in 1916 or whatever the date is where they choose to begin it. So that's, I believe, no secret, and I think that's going to happen. My plan originally was to do some updating. Then the television series got a green light, and I scrapped everything I'd written and I started over, because I realized that I didn't want to go in competition with television. There was no point. Also, it wouldn't help Neil. Neil was very closely involved with me on this audio series, as he's closely involved with the TV series. But I knew that we had a unique opportunity to turn Sandman into a kind of audio movie, but also an audio book at the same time. And when Neil and I disagreed on whether he asked me to be narrator or not, or I asked him, but I'm pretty sure he asked me. And as soon as he asked me to be narrator, it occurred to me that what we can do in the audio series, which the TV series wouldn't do, is actually be in Neil's mind as he writes it. We are hovering inside his brain, watching the pictures come up. And one of the great things that I've had on this, which the TV show can't do and wouldn't want to do, is I have Neil's original scripts, which are telling the artists what he wants to see in the frame, and very much are what you will see on the actual comic books. I can turn that into Neil's narration and have him describe what he is asking the artists to draw, and also what the characters are, how the reactions are working and what they're doing and so on. In other words, we are able to build a picture, not only using the actors and the backgrounds and the music, but also having Neil tell us how he originally saw the story play out. And I think that's actually worked in our favor, because I think a lot of fans have come in very worried we've somehow changed it, and discover that we haven't changed a thing. It's exactly as they remember the Sandman, but it's brought into sort of living life by the humans who are creating the noises and the words and so on. So I don't think I'll be working on the television series, but to be honest with you, I honestly think I'd rather be doing this version, because I think this is what people love. I look forward to the television version. In a perfect world, we will have finished putting ours out by the time it starts. I think COVID, for all its horrors, has been kind of like a friend there, because it's allowed us time to do this. So I'm looking forward to it, but I'm very, very happy we're doing this. And the good news, I think, is that Neil is thrilled, because he's got the best of both worlds. He's got a version which we are telling, which is absolutely faithful to what people love.
Yes.
And there is clear blue water between that and the TV version, which can then take a few chances with the material. So it's a win-win situation for everybody, I think.
Superb. Fantastic. And any message for Indian fans?
I'm thrilled. The biggest thrill for me is that it's been released in India,
Yeah,
that you have the chance to hear it. And
Yes.
I'm sorry it's in English. I'm sorry there isn't a Hindi version or a
Well, that would be
Urdu or whatever.
Well,
But the thing is that there is. Yeah, I started my BBC career in the World Service. I actually started this.
wow.
I met my
Yes.
wife over a hot tape machine in Bush House, and so my early memories are of the Hindi and the Urdu sections in Bush House, and the lovely people that worked there. And in fact, one of our first dates, I took my wife to see a play that was entirely in Hindi. And it was an interesting experience because it was a comedy, and everybody around us was falling about laughing, and we didn't know what was going on, but it looked funny.
No idea what's going on.
No idea. A dear friend Manoj, who was one of the guys in the section, said, "Come and see my play. Come and see my play." And he was a very funny physical comedian, but the language eluded me somewhat. However, I've always had, obviously, I made great friends in the sections. And so over the years, I've always been aware that there is a comic book following in India, and that it is a huge thing, and that it's a big deal. And that indeed there's a flourishing, comic books industry indigenously for you.
It's growing rapidly now, yes.
Which is absolutely fantastic because it's a great storytelling medium. So I'm just thrilled to bits. I one of these days I'd love to visit, put it that way, because I just think it's fascinating.
Great. Well, that's with our questions. And Dirk, a little word about our podcast. Our Facebook channel, Filmi Baniya, was started by me, and around 4 months ago. I'm myself a movie and television graduate from Los Angeles, and but the reason why we put this podcast out is we wanted to bring global content to the discerning Indian audience. Now, I would really like to thank you for giving your time to us and these amazing adventures you've shared with us in your life with Neil on the Sandman, and it's a wealth of knowledge and a lot we will learn through this. This will be on broadcast within a few days on our Facebook channel. I would request you to please tweet about this interview on your Twitter page. I'll be grateful.
I will do. If you could email me, Rahul, send me a link so that I can do that. I will keep an eye on yours as well.
Yeah, sure. I'll take your email from people at Publicis here in Mumbai.
Yeah.
And many thanks again for coming in. And we wish you more success, and hope to talk to you again on yet another amazing adventure.
I hope so too. It's been a joy. Thank you, Rahul, and have a lovely evening.
You too.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.